darkness of the deserted road stretched before Nathan Holloway as an endless tunnel. The journalist had directed for hours, crossing the deep Texas to a small town named Hurstwood. In the passenger seat, a recorder and a notebook with notes about the strange case I had been investigating. There was something peculiar in that story. Local farmers claimed that by falling at night, a luminous ox emerged in Campina, wandering silently. Those who tried to approach via the creature disappear before their eyes, leaving only fresh footprints on the floor. For many, it was just an old legend, transmitted by generations. For others, it was a real threat, an inexplicable presence that had haunted the region for decades. Nathan, a skeptical and practical journalist, was not impressed by local myths. He had built his career unmasking urban legends and exposed reports like these as nothing but collective hysteria. But something bothered him in this story. The number of witnesses was too high, and the descriptions were frighteningly consistent. By crossing the rusty plate indicating the entrance of Hurstwood, he felt an involuntary shiver. The city was tiny. Ancient wood, an isolated gas station, and a grocery store with faded signs. Few cars on the street, people looking suspiciously at the arriving stranger. And before we continue with this intriguing story, be sure to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. This helps us bring more content like this to you. Now, let's go back to the story. He parked before Hurstwood Inn, the only motel in the region. As he got out of the car, the dry heat of the night wrapped him, and an oppressive silence seemed to hang over the city. As soon as he entered the reception, he was greeted by an old lady with a suspicious look. "Simple or double room?" she asked, without taking her eyes off the yellowish newspaper she held. "Simple, please. I'm here to work." The woman looked at him from soslayo. "Journalist?" "Yes. I came to investigate the story of the ghost ox." The receptionist was motionless for a second, so he let out a heavy sigh and pushed the key to him. "I hope you leave before sunset." Nathan frowned. "Why?" She just pointed to a picture behind the counter. It was a black and white photograph of a group of farmers, taken many decades ago. In the center of the image, a man held a chain. Chained to her was a huge ox with dark and empty eyes. "He's been between us before, and came back." Nathan took the key without saying anything and climbed to the room, feeling a strange weight on his chest. Nathan slept little on that first night. The motel's room was simple and muffled, with a ceiling fan that rang from each spin. Around 2 in the morning, he woke up with a noise coming from outside. A deep and severe sound, something between a mute and a distant lament. He got up quickly and went to the window. The street was empty, only the rusty posts thrown elongated shadows on the asphalt. But then, across the road, in the campine that stretched beyond the city, a weak light shy away. Nathan took his cell phone and recorded a video as he left the room. The hot wind of dawn made the dust up, and each step toward the Campina seemed heavier than the previous one. The light was about 500 meters away, moving slowly. He turned on the flashlight and walked toward her, and then disappeared. For a moment, just silence. Nathan looked around, the flashlight shaking in his hand. That's when you noticed the marks on the floor. Large, deep, fresh footprints. And they weren't there before. A shiver went up his spine. He took pictures and retreated slowly, returning to the motel with the uncomfortable feeling that he was being observed. The next morning, Nathan drove to the McAllister farm, where one of the farmers who had reported the appearance lived. Henry McAllister, a 1-year-old man, welcomed him on the porch of his house, chewing smoke and watching the fields with tired eyes. "So you are the journalist?" "Nathan Holloway. I came to investigate the reports on the ox." Henry spit on the floor and laughed without humor. "Are you going to write any bullshit saying we're all crazy?" "I just want to understand what is happening." Henry was silent for a moment, so she was assigned for Nathan to follow him. They walked to an old stable at the back of the property. Inside, between hay bales and rusty tools, there was a wall full of old photos and newspaper clippings. Nathan approached and read the titles. Strange Apparition Heish's Hurstwood Farmers, 1956. Tragedy at McAllister Farm, Young Ad after Vision of the Ghost. Boy, 1978. Hunters Disappear in Campina, 1994. He felt a cold in his pimple. This has been happening for a long time. Henry nodded. My grandfather said he started 19th century when the city was still growing. The ox belonged to a farmer named Silas Boone, a cruel man who believed animals were just tools. He wore whips, chains, and made his oxen work to death, but one of them did not die like the others. What happened? Henry pointed to a black and white photo. It was the same as Nathan turned on the motel. They say Silas arrested this ox here. Lazarus was his name. The animal began to get sick, but Silas forced him to work. In the end, Lazarus fell exhausted in the middle of the Campina. Silas ordered his employees to chain him and leave him there to die. But the ox resisted for 3 days under the scorching sun, without water, without food. And they say that last night, when finally stopped breathing, his eyes shone like blue fire. Nathan swallowed hard. And since then, does he appear? Henry looked out the window to the fields. Every time someone disrespects the earth, when a farmer is cruel, when someone tries to take what is not yours, Lazarus returns. Nathan pondered for a moment. Has anyone done something recently that could have awakened him? Henry hesitated. There is a man here in the city, Joe Callahan. He bought a large part of the land and wants to expel the smaller farmers. He is destroying everything, cutting trees, poisoning the ground. If there's someone who called Lazarus's wrath, it's him. Nathan made a mental annotation. I needed to talk to Callahan. But before I could say something, a distant scream echoed through the Campina. The two looked at each other. It came from Callahan's property, Henry murmured. Nathan felt a shiver run through his body. Something was happening, and he needed to find out what it was. The scream still echoed in Nathan's mind when he and Henry hurried out of the stable. The afternoon sun burned the cracked earth, and the smell of dry hay hanged in the air. On the horizon, Joe Callahan's farm rose like a concrete and metal spot amid the golden Campinas. Henry spit on the floor. If there's someone who deserves a fright on the other side, it's this bastard. Nathan didn't answer. He had already dealt with Mogates like Callahan before, greedy hours who saw earth and tradition only as obstacles to their profits. But did it explain what was going on? Or was there really something beyond superstition? The two went up on Henry's truck and drove to Callahan's property. As they approached, the weather seemed heavier. The wind that once blows free was now still. The heat seemed denser. The silence was uncomfortable. As they passed the iron gate, Nathan noticed what was once a living and fertile Campina. Now the soil was dark, burned and cracked. Trees had been knocked down, and a large tumbled excavation machine next to an immense ditch. "What the hell is he doing here?" muttered Henry, frowning. Suddenly a sound made them stop. Heavy steps. Fast. Desperate. A man emerged, running from the barn, staggering and holding his bloody arm. "Help! He's here! He's here!" Nathan and Henry got out of the car quickly. The man fell to his knees before them, panting. It was Marty Henshaw, one of Callahan's forever. His face was dirty with earth and sweat, and his wide eyes were full of pure dread. "What happened?" Nathan asked, holding the man by the shoulders. "The ox. I saw him. He came to me." Henry exchanged a dark look with Nathan. "What do you mean by came to you?" Marty trembled. "We were digging the earth, preparing to put concrete. Callahan wanted to expand the pasture and he swallowed hard, looking around as if he was afraid that something would hear him. "We found chains." The silence fell on them. Nathan felt a chill up his spine. "Currents?" Marty nodded frantically. "Yes, old, rusty, buried deep. When we started to pull them, the floor trembled, and then we hear—" He stopped and looked at the horizon, as if revolving the moment. "The mute." Nathan felt the skin shivering. "Lazarus." Marty covered her face with her hands. Then the lights started. A blue mist appeared out of nowhere. The excavation machine turned alone. Danny was driving. She was thrown into the hole. And when I looked, he was there, the ox. Nathan looked around, trying to see some sign of the supposed animal. Nothing, just silence and a strange smell in the air. Something metallic. Henry sighed. Callahan finally moved what he shouldn't. Nathan approached the excavated hole. Inside, the chains were visible, twisted and covered with ancient earth. Beside them, a bone, big, powerful, Lazarus's body. Nathan took a deep breath. The legend was real. Before they could sue what they were seeing, a crash shook the floor. Across the field, something shone in the darkness that was formed with the sunset. A huge figure of bluish light emerged between the trees. The air became heavy. The smell of iron and wet earth intensified. The ghost ox of Campina was there, and was furious. The crash echoed like an underground thunder, and Nathan felt his chest vibrate with the strength of the impact. The floor trembled under his feet. The smell of wet earth and iron became stronger, and a bluish mist began to spread through the field, crawling like ghostly fingers through the cracked ground. Henry held Nathan's shoulder and whispered, "Run." But Nathan didn't run. He needed to see with his own eyes. The immense silhouette moved slowly between the trees, luminous, ethereal, but with a weight that seemed real. The paws of the ox sank on the earth, and each step left deep and bright footprints. Lazarus's body seemed made of pure blue fire. The horns were like curved light blades, the eyes two black holes burning in the middle of the bright mist. His chest climbed and descended as if he still breathed, and then he changed. The sound was overwhelming. It was not just a sound, it was a wave of pure strength, something primitive, loaded with centuries of contained fury. Marty Henshaw shouted and ran out, stumbled in his own fear. Henry cringed next to Nathan, but the journalist kept looking straight at the creature, and that's when he noticed. Lazarus was not there to kill randomly. He was looking for someone. Callahan. Nathan turned on his heels and looked at the main house of the property. The lights were lit. Someone was inside. "Henry, he's behind Callahan." Henry hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Come on." The two ran through the field, dodging the twisted trees and unstable soil. The noise of the ox's strides was just behind, every footstep a heavy thud that shuddered the floor. Callahan's farm rose like a concrete castle, imposing, but now powerless in the face of the advanced creature. Nathan first arrived at the door and began to help her. "Callahan, open this door." No answer. Henry kicked the door tightly. Nothing. It was then that the floor trembled again. Nathan looked back and saw Lazarus stopped less than 30 meters, his body radiating an even more intense light. His eyes were fixed in the house. "He's going through this house if necessary," Henry murmured. Nathan looked at the windows and noticed a shadow moving upstairs. "Callahan, you need to get out of there." Silence. Boom. The impact of Lazarus's hull on the floor made one of the windows shatter. The blue mist began to climb the walls, as if trying to swallow the house. The air was heavy, and Nathan felt the skin tingled. So finally, the door opened. Joe Callahan appeared at the sweaty entrance, wide eyes and pale face as paper. "What the hell is happening? You messed with the wrong land," shouted Henry. Callahan looked at them without understanding, and then noticed the blue light reflected on the floor. Slowly he turned his head, and it was face to face with Lazarus. Time seemed to stop. The great ghost ox rose before him, his breath a gelid breeze, his eyes like two deep chasms. Nathan saw Callahan pale even more. His lips were shaking, and he began to take steps back, almost tripping over. This is not real. This is not real. But it was. Nathan knew it was. And then Lazarus advanced. The blue mist was risen like a storm, and Callahan released a scream of pure terror. The ox's luminous body enveloped him, and for a moment Callahan disappeared into the light. Nathan and Henry retreated, protecting their eyes from the intense flash. The air seemed to vibrate around them, and Nathan felt his heart hollow in his chest. And then, silence. When the light began to dissipate, Callahan was on his knees on the ground, panting. His face was bathed in sweat, and his eyes were different. Scared. But more than that, regretful. Lazarus backed away a few steps, his body starting to fade, and for the first time Nathan saw no fury in the creature's eyes. He saw peace. The bluish mist began to disappear. The brightness was erasing, and then, in a last flash of light, Lazarus disappeared. The silence that was left was deafening. Callahan fell sitting, staring at the dry land in front of him. Henry cleaned his forehead sweat and let out a heavy sigh. Nathan looked at the sky. The moon was shining. The night was quiet. Campina's ghost ox had left, but the legend would never be forgotten. The silence that was after Lazarus's disappearance was almost as frightening as his presence. The night was strangely quiet. No cricket sang, no sheet moved. Nathan bent down next to Joe Callahan, who was still sitting on the floor, shaking. The businessman, who once looked like an imposing and unbeatable man, now looked more like an old defeated. His gaze was lost in the void. Henry remained standing, watching the earth where, a few seconds earlier, the ghostly ox had been. There was no more blue shine, but the air still seemed loaded with something old, something powerful. Callahan tried to speak, but his voice came out hoarse and weak. He got into my head. Nathan exchanged a quick look with Henry before asking, "What did you see?" Callahan blinked a few times, as if trying to understand that. Then he swallowed hard and replied, "I felt everything he felt." Henry frowned. "What does that mean?" Callahan took a deep breath and finally raised his eyes to them. There were tears there. Pain, thirst, tiredness, but above all, abandonment. Nathan was silent, trying to soothe that. "Did you feel what Lazarus has passed?" Callahan nodded with difficulty. "It was like I'm there, tied." He touched his own neck instinctively. "I couldn't move. The sun burned. Each breath was a fight. He closed his eyes tightly as if he didn't want to remember. And then came the darkness. Henry crossed his arms. "Now do you understand what you did? What did we all do?" Callahan didn't answer. He just looked at the floor, breathing heavily. Nathan got up and stared at the field. He didn't come back to kill anyone. He returned to warn. Henry nodded slowly. He wants respect. Campina was different now. The air no longer looked so heavy, and the shadows didn't seem so threatening. The curse had been broken, at least for now, but Nathan knew that was not the end. Lazarus had not disappeared forever. He would only rest again, so that he was disturbed again. Callahan stood, still unstable. His face was marked by the experience. I need to fix it." Nathan watched him. "And how do you want to do that?" Callahan took a deep breath and cleaned his forehead sweat. "I will return the earth, all the lands I took." Henry arched his eyebrow. "And do you think this is enough?" Callahan looked around, the eyes loaded with a new weight. "I don't know, but it's a beginning." Nathan saw something in Callahan's eyes that wasn't there before. Fear, but also respect. Maybe that's what Lazarus wanted. Nathan took his recorder and hung up. That would not be just another sensational matter. That was a real story, and the legend of the Campina's ghost would live forever. The sun was born in Hurstwood, as if nothing had happened. The sky was clean, the wind blown smoothly through the Campinas, and the birds were singing again. But Nathan, Henry, and Callahan knew something had changed. The weight that hanged over the city had been relieved. Lazarus's presence was out, but his mark would remain. Nathan spent the morning watching the region's farmers gather on Callahan's property. The news spread fast. The entrepreneur would return the lands he had taken, ending the processes of expulsion from small producers. For the first time, the farmers did not look at him with hatred, but with cautious hope. Campina's ghost ox had gotten what she wanted. In the late afternoon, Nathan drove to Campina, where it all started. The place where Lazarus had appeared the night before was now intact, as if nothing had happened. The previously shining footprints had gone, and the earth looked more fertile, more alive. Henry appeared beside him, holding an old leather hat in his hands. "Are you going to write about it?" Nathan sighed, staring at the horizon. "I don't know," Henry laughed. "That doesn't match a journalist." Nathan smiled in the corner. "Some stories need not be told. They need to be remembered." Henry nodded. "Lazarus always comes back when the earth is disrespected, but this time, I think he can rest a little." The wind blew hard, and for a brief moment, Nathan swore he heard a distant mute, echoing through the valley. A shiver traveled his spine. Maybe the legend would never end, but at least for now, Lazarus was at peace. 5 years passed. The city of Hurstwood had changed. The lands that were once dry now flourished again. The soil looked more fertile. The farmers worked in harmony, and the legend of Campina's ghost ox had become more than a story a warning had been. Joe Callahan, the man who almost destroyed everything, had left the city shortly after the events of that night. He sold his business and disappeared, as if he was afraid that something was watching him. Some said he had been living in the north in search of redemption. Others swore that at dawn silent, he still dreamed of Lazarus and woke up screaming. Nathan Holloway never published the story. It was not a report. It was something bigger than words could explain. But he was never the same again. He returned to his city, worked in other articles, investigated other legends. But none of them marked him like that, until the day you received an envelope without a sender. Inside, there was a single photo. It was an image of the Hurstwood Campina, taken at night. In the middle of the moonlight illuminated, a bluish figure was partially visible, not clear, not solid, but there, powerful, immortal. On the back of the photo, just a handwritten phrase, "He never left." Nathan took a deep breath and looked out the window of his apartment. He felt the warm wind come in, bringing with it the distant smell of wet earth. Lazarus was still there, waiting, and one day he would come back. What did you think of this outcome? Leave your opinion in the comments. We love to know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like to support our work. We see each other in the next video.